So I'll introduce myself. I will be chairing this session. I'm Dr. Dalia Ghanem Yazbek. I am a resident scholar at the Carnegie Middle East Center. For those who are not familiar, the Carnegie is one of the oldest think tank in the world. We are an independent policy research institute, and we write research and analysis that have policy recommendation that are policy recommendation oriented. That being said, we are going today to tackle an important topic that is a source of concern for all of us, youth radicalization. This is not an issue only for the MENA region. It is an issue actually for Europe and for the West in general. A group such as Daesh, for instance, that was believed to have something like 30,000 fighters. 20,000 of these fighters were believed to have come from 62 different countries, and as a matter of fact, the top 5 countries that sent the most, that exported the bigger number of fighters to Daesh are Tunisia with 6,000 people, Russia with 5,000 individuals, Saudi Arabia with 2,500 people, and Jordan with 2,000 people. So this is a real problem for the entire region, but also for Europe, as shown by the latest attack on European soil. So it is hard and problematic to talk about radicalization. What is violent radicalization? Aren't we all in a way radicals in our belief, and so on and so forth? So, it's very hard to find a concept, but there is a definition of Brian Jenkins that I really like because it captures the sense. First of all, he insists that radicalization is a process. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. Nobody wakes up in the morning saying to himself, I decided to be a jihadist or a terrorist today. It doesn't exist. It is a process. So radicalization is a process of adopting for oneself or trying to inculcate to others commitment not only to a system of radical belief, but to their imposition on the rest of society. The use of violence, of course, is the latest step of this process. So radicalization is a very, very complex process, and we have amazing guests today to talk about that. But I've been studying that before the word became a buzzword, and I've been studying that since 2002 when I decided to go in Algeria. And Algeria, for those who are not familiar with the country, is a country that witnessed a terrible civil war that broke out in 1992 when Islamists wanted to take the power and to establish a caliphate. As a result, we had 10 years of civil war, 200,000 people who died in that war, 7,000 disappeared, 1 million IDPs, internally displaced people, and more than 25 billion of material damages. So I went to Algeria with this very simple yet complex question: why some Algerians decided to become jihadists? How a normal individual decides to turn into a devil? And we have today our guests who are going to answer this very complex question. Again, I insist, it is a complex question because radicalization differs from country to country, town to town, village to village, and individual to individual. As I keep saying, profiling is very hard. Every life story is unique. So today we have with us expert on that subject. We are going to start with Niveen. Sorry to put pressure on you. So Niveen Bondorji, she's team leader. She's a CVE. For those who are not familiar, CVE means Countering Violent Extremism. Wana Institute, she's at Wana Institute in Jordan. And Niveen is going to share with us her findings on mapping the journey of 5 returnees. Returnees are those people who basically went to Syria or Iraq in IS-held territories and came back. So Niveen is going to talk about these 5 returnees, please.
Welcome, all of you, and as a Jordanian, I would like to welcome you in Jordan also. So as Dalia just mentioned, I will be sharing with you some findings we had from. Let me give you just a little bit of a background why we did this study and why the sample number is very small. As you know, and as Dalia mentioned, radicalization is a very complex process, and there has been a number of approaches in interdisciplinary approaches in trying to understand the problem, and rightfully CVE research has combined criminology, psychology, social psychology, and different kind of security studies. What we wanted to do is actually expand that interdisciplinary nature of CVE research and borrow a tool from market research, and that's journey mapping. In market research, this tool is used to understand the attitudes and perceptions that make customers choose to buy a service or an item. And since radicalization is an individual process that involves at its core a change of attitudes and then embracing new types of behavior, we wanted to use this tool to actually see how useful it is to help us to understand radicalization. So we did that using a very limited sample because access to former fighters or like returnees is usually subject to heavy security restrictions. So we were able to get approval to study the cases of 5 fighters and returnees. 3 of these are returnees, 2 of them are fighters one of them is still in Syria as far as his family knows, and one of them has died there. And for us to be able to use this tool to understand this journey of what attitude and perceptions led to their radicalization, and then what change in attitudes and perceptions convinced them to come back after they made the decision to go there to Syria, we also realized that we need to understand this journey of change from the perceptions of their close ones, so friends and family members. And this has been a very useful tool in allowing us not only to examine what the returnees themselves say about their journey, but also how their friends, neighbors, teachers, or spouses reflect on this journey of change. So in a way, it also addresses one concern that you usually have in radicalization research is to what extent can you actually trust the information you get from a former fighter or a returnee. So we try to address this concern by having this process of triangulation. So the findings are based on, in total, 15 interviews. I think I'd really highlight just very few aspects from the study. I would like to highlight how helpful was using a tool that is traditionally not used in this kind of research. And this this is clarified in 5 aspects. First of all, this tool allowed us to get insights to new aspects that were not accounted for traditionally in radicalization research. So, for example, we found that one of the returnees went there not for ideological reasons. He was actually, his sense of injustice was driven by a value we call in Arab Bedouin culture, hamiyya. That is the sense of protecting the weak, okay? Regardless of that weak person, whether was from your same culture or religion, etc., but it is a deeply entrenched value in Bedouin culture. And he himself, coming from the south city of Ma'an, which is highly tribal also in Jordan, he was driven by this value. And this has changed his perception. When he was seeing videos of atrocities in Syria, that was his most driving concern, for him to make this decision. He says, and everyone else has confirmed, he has never prayed before. He's never even questioned whether he knows anything about Islam before making that decision. So that is one new aspect that was highlighted in this findings. Using this tool also confirmed previous findings, and for example, the role of mothers. The most influential role and actor for the fighters' decision to come back was their mothers. All the fighters were in touch with their families. Those who returned and those who died there, they were in regular contact with their families. The mothers had the most influential role in bringing them back. Sometimes emotional blackmail, sometimes of religious arguments about the role or the importance of a son to taking care of his mother, etc. And this is like widely researched in radicalization research. The other value of using this tool was understanding certain in-theater dynamics. For example, we learned through these findings that some actors on the ground in Syria who were actually operatives of the radical groups themselves have actually highlighted the doubts and concerns for the newcomers. So one of them was asked by one operative, why did you come to Syria? And the fighter told him his reason, said, you came for the wrong reason, just go back. And when that fighter decided to go back, he actually ran away to this same operative. He sought refuge in his place for a few days before the smugglers were able to bring him back. So that also tells us of what is happening inside those groups there. So we know that there are fighters within these groups who are willing to assist others making their way back. Another thing, using this tool, it has challenged some of the previous findings about the whole radicalization journey. We were really shocked to realize that these fighters have actually paid smugglers to get into Syria. They were not paid by radical groups to go there. No, all these fighters, these fighters have paid an amount between $300 to $450 to be able to be smuggled there. And a very recent investigative article in Ra'i Daily in Jordan was released 2 days back, and talking about a cell that was intercepted last September. And in the findings, in the files of that court case, the potential fighters were asked to pay $3,000 to be smuggled into Syria. Okay, so this tool also challenged this kind of assumption that was there before. And a final takeaway from using journey mapping was that it has guided policymakers to a very crucial area of CVE research now at this historical moment. The returnees now, even though they are free, but they are very desperate. They are in a worse situation now than what they were facing before they made this decision, economically, socially, and in terms of their future prospects. So one example, one very concrete example. Now in Jordan, they served their terms in prison, okay, and they are back in their communities. In Jordan, to be employed in the private or public sector, you need a no criminal record certificate. Of course, they cannot get that. But because they don't have that, they will not be employed anywhere else. So they are subject to exploitation in terms of their employment. And at the same time, they are subject to heavy restrictions when they travel within Jordan. So each time on a checkpoint on the highway, they are stopped sometimes for 2 hours every single time. That increases their isolation. People already don't want to be associated with them, fearing security hassles. Even their families, like we have one wife saying that I started hating traveling with my husband because of these security procedures. So these procedures are hitting at the core of the basic, let's say, rights that a returnee might be entitled to. And in a way, I don't want, like, this is a very big discussion in Jordan that should be that we should have in Jordan and elsewhere. What do we do with returnees? Like the latest statistics from the Sufan group point that out of the 3,000 fighters that went from Jordan to Syria, 250 have returned, but we don't know how many would try to come back. So far, we don't have any mechanism for reintegration, either in prison or in local communities. We know that there is some limited program in prisons that is not public and not subject to scrutiny. But the bigger question comes in local communities. How can local communities accept or deal with returnees? These are questions that are unanswered, in this area of research. I will conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you, Naveen. That was very, very interesting. It's funny how in different places and different times, the push and pull factor can be the same. When you talked about that some of them, many of them, had no real ideological or religious reason. It's really interesting because when I talk to former jihadists in Algeria, 70% of them, and I am quoting one of them because I like his sentence as he put it, never touch the Quran in their life. And you know, we have the same phenomena today, and actually in Europe as well. You know that many foreigners from Europe took Islam for dummies in their suitcase before going to Syria. But then again, we have the question of how do we really measure, you know, their ideological and religious motivation, and because there is a difference between the religious motivation and the religious justification of their acts. About the rehabilitation, hold there, because we are going to tackle this topic again. I think the case of Jordan is very interesting with the lack of rehabilitation and, yes, initiative within society, because this might push people back again in the arms of jihadist groups. Amin, we're going to move to you. Amin Nahmi is president of the Lebanese Development Network, LDN, in Lebanon. Amin is going to explain, even though it overlaps, but we are very interested, what attracts some youth to join extremist groups. And I am very interested because when we talked, Amin, you said that, and I agree with you. You said that there is typologies. You can do some types. There is some types of youth at risk individual who you can say that this person can or cannot go. So I mean, the floor is yours.
Good morning. In my research preparing this panel, actually, I was surprised that I discovered so many information I didn't know before. I'll try during this small intervention to provide you with some information about what's happening on the extremism part of the world. Extremism, terrorism, neglective behavior, whatever, they are all the same. Historians and sociologists actually agree that this happens long time ago in history. However, September 11 was the crucial point in bringing this to the international level. Three questions I'll be dealing with today. The first one is, what attracts some young people to extremist groups? Oslo and Akershus University College, they conducted a 4-year study supported by Horizon 2020 under the EU, and they surveyed 8,500 Norwegians aged between 16 and 19. And the results were 60% of the young people surveyed agreed that there is a war between Islam and the West. However, a majority of both Muslim and non-Muslim agreed with this statement. I'm not trying to speak here, and I will not, on security levels, intelligence, even religions, because the examples I'll bring to the tables, they are somehow out of this scope. Reasons extremist groups are attractive to youth. What's sexy in being an extremist? The main target for groups, according to growing leaders, like Islam State, for instance, is said to be young people between 16 and 24. So those movements actually are targeting people between 16 and 30 years old, including the bracket between 16 and 24, which are the golden mine of their movements. Three major points are as follows. Contrarian viewpoint, becoming significant in society, and grievances against all civil movements. However, as my colleague was saying, that there is a crucial push-pull factors which affects this behavior. First and foremost, which is likely a common denominator between all of the researches, surveys, and studies, is the socioeconomic factor, which is surprisingly existing in almost all of the prominent studies. First factor as a push factor, and I would like to say that there are actually two major points. The first one is what attracts people or young people to join extremist groups. The second one is what keeps you in these groups. The push factor is the lack of socioeconomic opportunities. They are left in society, no reference, no haven for them. Second, being marginalized. And third is the grievance. The pull factors are three as well. Radical recruitment narratives. There is a certain speech which attracts actually their inclination. Propaganda and the social ties to some networks. Who are attracted among these brackets? There are four groups who are really attracted. First are the mentally ill or sick or depressed. Second, who are into the category of flavor of mouth, who are against any regime, any power, any authority. Third, who are religiously zealots. And four, the socially frustrated. So in all of those components, we find a socioeconomic and a very social component which is active in this context. I will take three examples. One is Somalia, the second is Afghanistan, and the third one is Serbia. To say that extremism is not related only to one religion, to one society, and it's overwhelming. In Somalia, and according to one of the major studies, excuse me, 27 of the respondents joined for economic reasons, 27%. They joined for economic reasons, for lack of opportunity. 15% mentioned that for religious reasons, and 13% were forced to join for a certain reason. Reasons to stay, and not only not to leave. 21, they belong to this extremist, which means it's the doctrine, it's the preaching, it's the invitation to join, the sense of belonging through doctrinal behaviors, thoughts, whatever. 11%, they feel responsible for defending a certain doctrine. And the lower percentage, fear of leaving or economic dependence. And the Afghanistan example, it's a study conducted by Mercy Corps, and they found that the first reason is frustration. The second is impunity and corruption. The third is lack of basic or communal support facilities and opportunities. In Serbia, however, the survey was supported by the UNDP Serbia office. The conceptual framework recognizes 8 drivers. I will mention a few of them. First and foremost is role and influence of global politics. We're not into the context of Afghanistan and Somalia. However, there are still mainly the same background of joining extremism. 2 is economic exclusion, as well, the lack of opportunity. 3, political elimination from contributing to political life. 4 is injustice, and 5 is dissatisfaction with the rejection of socioeconomic and political system. As I said, that September 11 was a crucial point in enhancing this movement on both sides. In 15 years, the United States alone have invested on a yearly average, about $360 billion in fighting extremism, which results of $1.78 trillion. The EU as well have increased the contribution from 5.7 million in 2002 up to 93.5 million in 2009. I would like to go to the social media effect, because as we know now, the social media is available for everyone. Social media platform constitutes a huge reference for attraction to those young people in joining extremism. I will take YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. 50%, according to studies, of young people who joined extremist groups were recruited through social media. The negative effect is, the breakdown is about 6 billion hours of videos are shown on YouTube, and they select any movie or any video they would like to be attracted to. On Twitter, actually, we have 350,000 tweets per minute, which results of 200 billion tweets per year. And this is what we call in French, endoctrinement. We're putting this poison in the minds of people and then trying to attract them. Facebook, however, remains the #1 social network, being a very highly, or having the highly effect on those youth minds. 87% of online users are aged between 18 and 29. This is the ideal platform for those extremist groups to promote their ideologies. The total number of active users is 2.01 billion users on Facebook, and 55 million status updates are made every day. So this is actually the ideal place where they can recruit people. To conclude, what measures should be taken to prevent violent extremism? There is no quick fix for this. It's going to take time, definitely. We need strategies over short, middle, and long run. I would like here to say that on June the 2nd, 2016, and during the Global Education First initiative they organized a roundtable on prevention of violent extremism. UNESCO representative to the Counterterrorism Initiative, Mr. Jorge Sequeira, he stated that in his opening remarks that extremism gains ground and flourishes when young people lack choices and meaning for their life. We're not talking about religions, we're not talking about faith, we're not talking about politics, we're talking about social status, which mainly represents the first and foremost factor to bring people to extremism. What can we do? As I said, that it's a long process, yes, and it's a challenging. However, we can enhance the access to education. We need to improve the socioeconomic conditions for those people. And third, we need to develop a global environment for cultural and religious diversity, hoping that those three factors or three solutions could bring out some, let me say, softness to the issue of extremism in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Amin. I think it's, you said so many very interesting things, but you know, the socioeconomic factor is so important. You know, I keep saying all the time that there is no direct link between jihadism and extreme violent radicalization and poverty. However, it is a very important factor to take into consideration. I've been, you know, doing an extensive work on the Sahel region, meaning, you know, southern of Algeria, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and you know, this is Mali, for instance, is a country where Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb was able to seize northern Mali in 2012. And my research showed that many of the youth who were joining Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, it wasn't because they were convinced, it was because Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb had a great financial assets and they could pay the youth who joined them. Just let me give you a very concrete example. A youth in Mali is a country when the minimum wage per month is $45. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb is capable of giving $800 to a youth who would spy on the MINUSMA, which is the UN peacekeeping group there. What is $800 in Mali? It's a very important, it's an opulent amount of money. And unfortunately, many people do join because they are economically but also politically marginalized. Social media is very important, and I think if Daesh did something, is Daesh was so good at mastering social media that they made the long monologues of Osama bin Laden totally has been. And there is this academic who said a very interesting quote. He said, if Al-Qaeda was publicity shy, Daesh is a public whore. Because when it comes to media, Daesh were very, very good because exactly as you said, they knew who they were targeting. And who they were targeting as a generation that is almost born with a tablet in her hand. So we are moving now to Professor Mike Hardy. Professor Mike Hardy is professor and executive director of Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations, Coventry University in UK. So Professor Hardy is going to tell us a bit more about whether we have what you call a fit-for-purpose strategy, and whether we are doing actually basically a good job at managing youth radicalization or no. Thank you, Professor Hardy.
So thank you very much. It's a real delight to be here. And I wanted to tackle directly the title of the session, really with a question, and it's based upon several years of our research, not just into Islamic terrorism, but into the disconnection of young people generally, and it's a major problem. So my thesis is, I'll give you the bottom line first, that we make a mess of it. We shouldn't be surprised at the state that we're in. We shouldn't be surprised that young people go and fight in far-off places. We have sufficient evidence to know that we're making matters worse in the way that we manage the whole process. So we can understand it. We can get to the grips with the social deprivation, the exclusion, the digital world, but these are simply tokenistic explanations of fundamental things. So what's the conclusion? If you think the internet's a problem, do you stop it? We can't stop it. It exists. If you think that Daesh's management of social media is brilliant, it is. What can you do? You counter it? Do you stop it? Do you censor? Do you cut it off like the Chinese would? No. This is part of our modern world. We have to manage it better. If you think that young people have no opportunities, can we really provide the opportunities they need? The global capitalist process doesn't do this. It removes opportunities from some to give them to others. So we could give everyone opportunities by forcing the reallocation of capital, but we'd create huge problems. This is a wicked problem. This is complexity run amok. So now, I'm not going to be too depressing. My thesis is that there is an approach to reframing our examination of this. Now, I started my interest in this as a simple economist. In 1997, I worked for the British government as a diplomat, and I was sent to Cairo. I'd never been to the Islamic Muslim world before. But I took simple tools of economics. I was there to promote multilateral trade and the coexistence of active countries in a Mediterranean free trade. But I didn't understand culture, economy, and society in Cairo when I got there. I'd had no preparation. And this is just an example looking back at my own personal journey. Because I didn't understand, I made all sorts of assumptions. Because we didn't understand youth radicalization, the British government prepared a strategy after 9/11. It's called the PREVENT program. You'll know about this. It's well written about and highly criticized. Yesterday, or the day before yesterday, we published in the UK statistics from 2015-16. For the first time, transparent acknowledgement of the application of a government policy. In 2015-16, 7,500 young people in Britain were identified as potentially at risk of radicalization. It won't surprise you that 70% of these were Muslim. Won't surprise you at all. Now, are we really serious that the threat of at-risk, disconnected young people is simply a religious issue or a particular community? No, we're not. So we've generated, it's a good example in my work of looking at the problems of what I call self-fulfilling prophecies. We think there's a problem, we create a structure to identify the problem, and it becomes a problem. As my two colleagues have already very articulately said, the problems with youth and their getting at risk to doing things that are antisocial and that are difficult for their own futures has not really got to do, from our evidence, with religion, with ideology. It's more often than not relating to disconnection reflected by humiliation or by an absence of dignity. Global affairs matters. We can see things happening to people of like kinds elsewhere. We get very angry. But the psychologists will tell you, we need to belong and we need to be different. When we can't belong to a world which discriminates and which creates social injustice for many of our brothers and sisters, we get drawn into anger. Social injustice over long periods of time is another great source. The social injustices that we see in the world. Many of the radicalized young people are well educated already. They're strong community participants in terms of their families. So it's not a question of being inarticulate and uneducated. It's a question of humiliation, of a seek for dignity, and social injustice. And the third major driver in our research is also showing that if you haven't got an open, transparent, and safe place to resolve some of your anxieties, then you go to the caliphate where they offer you a panacea. In Britain in 2015, if you were to go to a police station and say, I'm worried about this, my children are getting radicalized, they would incarcerate the children. There is no space where we can resolve this creatively. And I think that's one of the concerns that's emerging from management, the managing of this. I've done a lot of research on the reintegration of former combatants and of child soldiers in a past life. Now I focus mainly on the issues we're discussing today. There are many parallels, and it's very powerful emotion. What happens in the case of a child soldier in Africa is that they're kidnapped by villains, by criminals. They're taken when they were 8 or 9 years old. They're highly influenced. There's no internet here. This is simply being put into the back of a lorry and taken away into the jungle. The first day of training for child soldiers is to shoot your friend. So they'll take 12 people. They'll give each of them a number 1, number 2, number 1, number 2, number 1. They'll give a gun to number 1 and tell them to shoot number 2. I'm not telling you a story. I'm recounting the research that we have from General Dallaire and the United Nations and the Canadian Forces. Children who become soldiers, of course, are not soldiers. They're victims. When they go home, they become exactly as Neville has described, the returnees from ISIS or from Afghanistan. They become ostracized. They have a problem. So if you're kidnapped as an 8-year-old and at 12 years old you manage to find your way home and you're then excluded because you're a disgrace, you're a humiliation to your community, but more often than not you're considered to be a continuing threat. I'm using this as a powerful example of how we haven't thought through the correct frame to manage this. This is a phenomenon of modernity that we have to cope with. And it's not restricted to Muslim youth. It's restricted to all those young people who capture the ability to express frustration, to challenge their lack of dignity, the humiliation that they find because of socioeconomic factors or political factors, and the lack of any system where that can be resolved. Let me finish, if I may, by looking at what I think our research points to some hooks that are more positive. And I would go away from these rather tokenistic challenges of treating young people and former radicalized, former combatants as continuing problems. We have to grow above that, I think. I think we need to create 3 things in our management of this, and I put this on the table. Firstly, we have to find a way of helping young people be at ease with themselves and their neighbors. It sounds very woolly and softy, but it's actually really important. You talked about education. Where in the curriculum in our schools is helping young people be at ease with themselves? Most young people have a crisis, so the psychologists, I'm an oldie, but I do read a lot about the psychology of young people. Young people have a problem being themselves. They flee into social media, into fashion, into music, into their age group, their peers, their global geography, because they have a struggle being themselves. They'd be great if nobody else would come and tell them what to do all the time. So my kids were the same. I have a trouble being me, Dad, my son would say. And so do we help young people become at ease with themselves? Secondly, do we create neighborhoods and communities that themselves are resilient? Why do we pay all the attention and the investment onto the individuals that are antisocial, those who are at risk or move? We should invest more on the communities that can become resilient and cope with their own. And finally, do we have public services that are joined up in any way with this journey? Do we have public services that care about this, or do they focus entirely on the mainstream and not on the disconnected and the marginalized? In my city of Coventry, we've taken a huge number of Syrian refugees in the recent crisis, which we're very proud about. But we haven't treated the Syrians as different and separate over there. They're fully integrated with the public services. And that required the citizens in Coventry to be educated and told and their awareness raised that these weren't special cases. Of course, they are special cases, but the future isn't going to be based on special cases. So the lessons we've done from our research, those are the three things we need: helping young people, building resilient communities, and responsive public services. And I'd finish with four things that I think from all our research in former combatants, child soldiers, returnees from young radicals fighting in desperate wars in senseless places, the four things that have come very strong. The one is that whatever we do, we can't do it top down. And a policy, a management policy that tries to deal with this from the top downwards will fail. You have to mobilize forces at the grassroots levels. It's the jihadists that will solve the problem of young jihadists. It's not somehow top-down politics and clever academics who understand the nature of radicalization. We have to, secondly, get very close to those that understand the conflicts and those most prescient with the current tensions. I gave a paper in London last year, in 2016, to a group of ambassadors at St. James's Palace. And I argued we should talk to ISIS. The thesis was that we should go and sit down and negotiate and discuss and have dialogue with Daesh. There was outrage in the room, I have to say. It was a fun session. But it was driving my principle that we have to support whatever progressive forces we can find. We have to understand it, and we have to get close to those who are directly experienced in the conflict. In the north of Ireland, 20 years of the Good Friday Agreement of Peace we'll celebrate next year. It only came about because the participants in that struggle sat and talked to each other. We're not out of the problem, but it only started to move forward when we got close. Secondly, we have to deal with the drivers of inequalities and social justice. We can't take on global capitalism, but we can mitigate some of its consequences. We have to take responsibility for creating a context in socio-economic and political world which doesn't humiliate people, that doesn't remove dignity. Why am I in Britain? I'm relatively privileged. In my country, last year, for the first time, the International Red Cross distributed food parcels. What's going on in the United Kingdom that should happen? It happened. And at the bottom of the food chain, at the bottom of the chains, people get challenged to their dignity, get humiliated by having to take voluntary contribution. We have to get that right. Thirdly, we have to protect human rights. We can't make ourselves safe by removing the rights of parts of our communities. We can't incarcerate our way out of the problem. That's a reality. Existing structures have to change in order to accommodate new paradigms of thinking. And finally, my final comment, let's cultivate a socially just world in everyday life, not just when we have a problem to solve. Let's not solve the problem of humiliation of communities just when they've become radical and violent. Let's construct a world, I know it's an ideal idea and aspiration, but my aspiration, let's construct a world in which social justice becomes the default and predictable, and not just bring peace processes to bear when we have conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. There is so much food for thought. I couldn't agree more with you about what you said about prevent, among other things, because unfortunately, most of the time, those programs that are trying to fight terrorism between quotes are actually creating it. Just to give you a very concrete example of it. In Africa, in the Sahel region, for instance, in Mali, when what happened in Mali, the authorities decided to have a ban on motorcycles. Motorcycles are very important in a region like Mali. And as a result, 13,000 people lost their jobs because they couldn't go from a region to another. And actually, during that same period, the number of people, youth, who joined Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb exploded. So by trying to fight terrorism, they were actually creating terrorists, jihadists. When it comes to, opening line, this is what I call opening line of communication with some jihadist movements. I agree with you, and I myself said it once at the European Union, and I almost got crucified that day when I said, listen, when a jihadist group wants to negotiate with you, it will make you know about it, and you should open lines of communication with them, because there is things to be done. In Algeria, for instance, in the 90s, Algeria had a successful disengagement, a group disengagement in Algeria. They were able to disengage an entire terrorist organization called back then IS, Armed Islamic Salvation Army, and they actually succeeded in demobilizing more than 15,000 fighters. Well, that is a success story. I mean, of course, there is no perfect template, there is no fit-for-all strategy, but there is things that we should start thinking about. And maybe, the Algerian experience, the Moroccan experience in terms of rehabilitation disengagement could be a starting point, and we are going to talk about that more. The last panelist, but not the least, Eva Grossman is the CEO for the Center for Democracy and Peace Building, TEDx Stormont, UK. Eva is going to share with us a personal story, if I may say. She's going to talk about how was it for her growing up in Poland, right, during the transition in Eastern Europe. And most importantly, she's going to tell us about the peace process. It's very important for us now also to discuss about post-conflict societies and how can we rebuild the social link that was actually, disseminated, if I may say, during war. Thank you, Eva. The floor is yours.
So, yes, I will zoom out a little bit and take you on a journey both in time and a little bit into different geographical locations. So, as I was growing up in Poland, I have witnessed the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the collapse and the end of the Cold War, as well as many states of the old Soviet bloc, South Asia and Latin America becoming more prosperous, more peaceful, more stable, and relatively free. At the same time, in Northern Ireland, the decades of violent political conflict ended up in peace agreement. So it all seemed that we may be moving into a new era of much more peaceful politics and global affairs being conducted in much more rational way. Therefore, after September 11, it came as a complete profound shock what started happening in the world, with a very deep polarization, with politics, with Brexit, with the election of a rather controversial president in the United States of America, rise of terrorism, fundamentalism, and so on. So we started asking ourselves in our center, what is actually happening? Are we focusing only on the needs of elites, of those in power? Why so many ordinary people feel so deeply disengaged? For the first time in the UK, the next generation will not be better off than their parents. People all across Europe feel completely disengaged. They're losing hope. They're losing sense of possibility. And perhaps this could be explained through the teachings of the late Polish philosopher Zygmunt Bauman, who talks about us living in the age of uncertainty. Everything around us is uncertain. We are on the passage from solid to liquid. We are moving from disengagement of power and politics, lack of social solidarity, complete collapse of long-term thinking, planning, acting. And everything around us is changing so quick, much quicker than we can bear. And this fuels fear and anxiety. And when we deal with fear and anxiety, we don't act in a rational way. And Neven said earlier about something what we in our Center for Resolution of Intractable Conflict in Oxford describe as a sacred values. When people feel threatened, when we feel threatened, when young people feel threatened, quite often are prepared to make sacrifices which normally would not apply in the rational setting. For instance, if we look at Germany at the beginning of the last century, it was one of the most educated and diverse populations in the world. So human rationality did not stop human aggression. So it's something we have to start thinking deeper about, that it's not only education and it's not only social economic factors. Perhaps something we have to really, really add to a deeper understanding of the social relations and engagement, especially with young people, are the human relations. And we have to remember that human relations, it's a two-way process. And something what Mike been talking about, the sense of humiliation, the sense of injustice, the sense of hopelessness that people are unable to resolve their grievances in a normal, peaceful, democratic manner. So next year, we will be celebrating 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, a peace accord in Northern Ireland which finished and ended the decades of violent political conflict. And it was focusing on three aspects: on peace, stability, and reconciliation. Peace and stability been certainly achieved. Reconciliation, we are still on a long, long journey. 20 years into the implementation of Good Friday Agreement, 93% of children are educated separately, Catholic and Protestant. A young Pakistani boy went to school and been asked by his friends, are you a Catholic or Protestant? He says, no, I'm a Muslim. And the kids ask him, okay, but are you a Catholic Muslim or a Protestant Muslim? So those divisions are very, very deep. 98% of social housing in Belfast is still segregated. At the moment, we are experiencing major political crisis. But there is one thing. People in Northern Ireland learned to disagree without killing each other. And this is a major, major success. Also, with Good Friday Agreement, what was addressed were three sets of relationships. And this sort of, there is a parallel to what Mike was saying, because we looked at the relationship between people in Northern Ireland, both Catholic and Protestant, people on the island of Ireland, north and south, and between Ireland and Britain. And sometimes when I think of the Arab world, it's something as well what I think Amin mentioned, that the global situation of addressing issues within countries, within region, and between region and its neighbors. But this can also be applied on individual level, helping young people to be at ease with themselves, helping to develop resilient communities, and then looking at the state level of having relevant policies in place. So what is really worrying, that what we're handing to the next generation of young people, it's not only that they have to maintain and on many occasions repair what we giving away, but also stress the importance of the relationships and the fact that we have to change the way of being, not only as individuals and communities, but sometimes even the entire nations. And what is probably needed most at the moment is giving young people sense of hope and sense of possibility. Something what I had growing up in communist Poland. We had the sense that, perhaps becoming part of European Union, being open, having the opportunities will help to drive change. And thankfully, all the processes in Poland were mainly peaceful. The transition was mainly peaceful. And, one of the things, sort of coming out of this forum is, thinking how we can address some of the most pressing issues of today: climate change, migration, terrorism, inequality. It's only through developing a new creative networks of collaboration between the science and academia and the public, private, and community sectors. And we really, really need to add to the social understanding and social engagement, especially of young people, human relationships, and the science of compromise, science of compassion, and above everything else, science of love. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva. That was very, very enlightening. I like the sentence that you said, and I am going to, sorry, to quote you again and again. You said, in Ireland, we learned how to disagree without killing each other. That's really very beautifully said, and I think this is the issue. How do we learn to do that? You know, when you talk about education, for instance, it's very important to see, for instance, in the Arab world. I am a pure product of public school in Algeria, but we have in the entire region this what we call in sociology the othering process. You know, they teach us from a very young age that there is the us, and then there is the them, and them is dangerous and impure, and so on and so forth. And when you see that there is this segregation still now today, that's terrible and that's dangerous, because that might constitute, you know, a danger for the sustainability of peace in that country. So. You know, there is one thing that I appreciated when I went to the Hammamet conference, which is a big forum like this one, organized by the British Council for North Africa, meaning Morocco, Libya, Algeria, and Tunisia. And they did this amazing project called Arab Young Voices. And actually, what is Arab Young Voices is that I see people who know the project. It was amazing because what the British Council is doing basically is teaching those young Arabs, young North African, how to debate. As simple as that. We don't know how to do it in the Arab world. We fight and we kill. It's terrible. But they don't teach us that at school. Why also? Because at school you are here just to listen to what the professor is saying, full stop. There is no critical analysis, critical thinking. You don't criticize. And what the British Council is doing is just wonderful, because when you see those young people from 16 to 28 years old, some of them are the future leader of that region. But if they are trained already to debate, that is the future of the region. Without a final note on hope, hope is very important. We need to give youth hope to believe in something different. But we need also to give them new heroes. You know, Scott Atran, in his book about talking to the enemy, when he met with the former jihadists, there is this beautiful graph passage when he talks about him going to Tatooine. I think, yes, it was Tatooine, and he was waiting for his interviewee to come, and he was looking at a bunch of kids who were playing football. So he approached them, Scott Atran go to them, and he tell them, who is your hero? Half of the group said, my hero is Zizou, Zinedine Zidane, you know, the Algerian French player who won the World Cup in 1998. And half of the other group said Osama bin Laden. And Scott Atran said, at that moment, I realized that we need to give them hope, but we need to give them new figures, new heroes. And this is what we need to work on. So without further ado, we have half an hour. Don't tell me I wasn't generous and I monopolized me and my panelists to talk, because I've been here for the last 3 days and we didn't have that much time for you know, debate. I want the session to be interactive. Please feel free to ask your question, do remarks, and we are here to answer you. And let's do that. We have half an hour. Our colleague there will help us to, let's start with this table and this young lady.
Thank you for the discussion. My name is Tala Sharqawi and I'm a student at the American University of Madaba. My question is directed to Dr. Naveen. You mentioned that mothers are most influential when it comes for their sons to come back in return. However, how influential are they in terms of the other way around? How much do they affect their sons to actually go to war or serve as jihadists? Thank you.
Gordana Šurlan from Serbia. You mentioned about problem in Serbia. I knew about that, but not so much. Because in the south part of Serbia, we have a big population of Muslim people, especially young people, and we all, especially all young people in Serbia, they don't have a job. Because economic situation is not so easy going and everything. But I would like to ask you, you mentioned that Serbia is one of the most, of the biggest population with jihadists. Do you include Kosovo as well in this? Because Kosovo is part of Serbia.
Actually, I didn't say that Serbia is among the biggest.
Maybe.
I just mentioned the example that
Okay.
stressing on the point that extremism is not related to only one religion. It's overwhelming in the
No,
group.
no, of
Yeah.
course. And thank you. Maybe I didn't understand that because, okay, thank you very much.
My name is Saad Kawalda, and I'm doing actually my master's in the University of Oxford and just visiting the conference. I'm originally Jordanian, and I do believe actually that whatever happens as like those jihadists or extremists is just a result and a mistake, or like it's an outcome of the mistakes of all the people all over the world, all the governments. We have, as local government, contributed to this mistake, for example, by not integrating them after they come back, by giving them the reasons to go there, as well as the Western governments. They have really done a lot of efforts in terms of like, just, creating whatever, reasons for them to go there. For instance, I mean, they have taught us that, us and them. However, when I look at the current situation in the world, I see them, really. I see, for example, that Americans have chosen like Trump. Even his program is clearly like, is against like, Muslims, is against like, so it shows that, they were somehow, to some extent, they were teaching us a right thing. So I do believe, or for instance, let's talk about like, Europe. I live in Europe since like 3 years. And for instance, like when Erdogan has gave the emergency status for 3 months, all the European, media agencies has criticized him. However, Francisco Hollande, he has given it for 9 months. Nobody cared. I mean, I lived in Germany, and nobody there at all like mentioned or highlighted. So I really see that there is a problem. I mean, I don't know whom like is the problem, like who's the reason for that problem, but there is a serious problem. And I do believe if you are a giant, if you are like a big guy, your mistake caused a lot of damage. If comparing to like if you are a small guy, so like America, UK, European Union, whatever, they should understand that whatever mistake they are doing, it caused a lot of damage. And I mean, I'm really happy to see a lot of Europeans here, and I'm so happy that all of you are in favor or like trying to solve the problem. However, it's very important, and it's a big responsibility you should have on your shoulders, is to like whatever you're telling us at the moment, it should really reach to the decision which is being made. Because if it doesn't reach, it's useless. It's all like talking around and nothing happens on the ground. So just that's actually my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Martin from Germany, also, but German originally. I'm from the Ministry of Agriculture, but I'm talking here about my experience as a parliamentary controller of the Secret Service. So we have information some studies don't have. We have about 200 people, mostly boys, but not only, don't forget the girls. Going from, or gone from Germany to Syria and to fight for ISIS and Daesh, however it is called. And some of them are now coming back. Many are killed because they're very radical. They stayed in the cities over there, but some are coming back. And other than you said here in Jordan, in Germany they are punished immediately because it's a crime to participate on a war in another country. And so they are arrested immediately and persecuted somehow and interviewed intensively, and so you get some results why they did go and why they came back. But it's more interesting why they went And the reason is not in the most cases, not the socioeconomic reason. In Germany, the situation is quite well, and there are Scandinavians going to Syria, and the situation in Scandinavia socioeconomically is better, even better than in Germany. I won't say that the socioeconomic reason is none of these persons existing, but mostly they are quite well educated, and the reason is, for some of them, it's a question of adventure. It's adventure. You have guns, you have cars, you have women, wives, which you don't have in Germany maybe, and the propaganda of the ISIS via internet was perfect. I mean, it was so attractive. We saw all the movies in these secret services, agreements, and controlling sessions, and it really attracts them. Don't forget. And I think for the future, we have to deliver clear messages. Because, as you said, in school, I mean, it's maybe different than in Arabic schools, as you mentioned in Algeria. They're discussing a lot. In our schools, there is no respect for teachers. I mean, respect, yes, but there is open discussion in German schools. I have 3 kids, and they're very into discussions. The respect, yes, it exists, but it's an open discussion. It's not like the teacher is the hero and, you know. And, but we have to deliver clear messages. It's not okay to go to another country and kill people. That's a clear message. And if you come back, you're going to be punished. Maybe not lifelong. You have to give a perspective, of course. But you have to deliver the clear message. And what you said, hero, that's very important. My hero, for example, is Mahatma Gandhi. Yeah? But other young kids, or especially boys, they have other heroes, of course. Like you said, Osama bin Laden. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. And don't forget the girls. Why did the girls? We had, I don't know, 50, 60 girls, 16, 17, 18 years old, going to the ISIS. Serving the men. It's not like the Kurdish women fighting, no. Serving the men in the kitchen, taking care about the children. That's the ideal. So, just some information. Thank you.
I will just answer the question from our friend here. In relation to the role of mothers, see the question, there has been a number of studies and findings about the role of women in general in violent extremism. The point here that I wanted to highlight was that when we look at the family or the familial dynamics that influence the decision of a fighter to come back, this is where like all of them agreed that it was their mother, not even the wife, you know, it was the mother. Another aspect we need to look at is the number of studies, as you rightly said, there is a role of the mother in indoctrinating, you know, a son when he was just a child, the whole concepts of jihad, you know, their role as a man, etc. That is definitely there, and I think our colleagues at Mercy Corps has highlighted in one of the reports from Jordan to Jihad one very clear example of a mother who had 4 sons who went to fight in Syria, and she was very proud of that fact, and she like boasted that they learned about jihad in home, and if she had more sons, she would have encouraged them to go back. So the role is there, it's definitely there. For us, what was interesting is to see, was that role in influencing the decision to come back more influential of the father or the mother or the wife, you know, or friends. And what we found is that friends were influential in making the decision to go to Syria, but coming back, it was the mothers. And on the question of mothers, when we talked to female preachers in different cities in Jordan, a number of them said that many of the mothers called the wa'ida over the phone or in person and asked, my son went to Syria, is that jihad? In Arabic, because that will give you the nuance, arda alayh wala ma arda alayh, you know? That's a very strong nuance and shows you that the mothers themselves are very confused about how to evaluate that decision of the person. A very minor comment on the comment of the colleague there. I think in our research, what we want to highlight more and more is that it's the government responsibility. When we talk about contextual factor, it is indeed the government responsibility. In Jordan, all youth talked about corruption as a very dominant factor in radicalization. And I want to acknowledge that so far we have been shying away from pointing fingers at governments, that you have failed in all development indicators, you have caused the problems. We even had one tribal leader when we were interviewing them about the role of the tribe in de-radicalization. He was very clear. We did not cause this problem. The government caused this problem. You should not ask us now to solve the problem. Yeah. So.
quick note on the role of the mother. I come back always to my country. You know, in Algeria, when some guys started to go to jihad, their mother would accompany them in the street and start doing yuyu. You know what is yuyu? Zagharit. They were so proud of it. And that's giving a blessing. But then when the disengagement and rehabilitation started, the government understood, you know, the role of the mother as the pillar of the family. So they started using, between quotes, the mother, bringing them on national television during peak hours, calling their sons to go back home, and that worked. So the mother has, you know, a very, very powerful role, and we can use them to call for their kids to come back, because as Naveen said, he won't listen to his sister, he won't listen to his wife, but the mother is sacred. And we should capitalize on that. Mike, you have a comment.
So yes, I was also taken by the experience in the north of Ireland and other places where you find a peace that's actually equal to disagreeing without killing each other. And what causes that? I think mothers have a huge role and played a huge role in the north of Ireland. It was the mothers who said enough killing of our men and our husbands and our boys. That was a very powerful voice. But other things were happening at the same time. I think the notion of violence not delivering to your long-term political ideology, that will be a very powerful thing. In the north of Ireland, it was the fact that the terrorists, the combatants, just began to wake up to the fact that violence wasn't going to deliver. There must be another way. And you'll know there that we had a system which allowed former combatants to become parliamentarians. That's a hugely sophisticated outcome that's very difficult to see in everywhere. So that's a really important one. If you've got the confidence of your system can open its doors to that, then you have the prospect that we had in the north of Ireland. A couple of other things lead us to create places where we can disagree without killing each other. We have to move, I think, our philosophical and cultural thinking forward. We come from a paradigm in the West of global capitalism and of individualism and rational behavior that actually is quite alien in other parts of the world. But we believe that eventually we would converge and agree with a common set. You can call it sacred values, you can call it all sorts of things. British values are often talked about in my country. But actually this isn't broadly reflective of cultures everywhere. It's reflective of the dominant mainstream culture of the West, in which these things make sense. So we don't find it easy in the West to disagree amongst each other. We conform or we discriminate. That's the simple way that we do things. In other cultures, that I've lived in East Asia for some parts of my life, you find that disagreement is much more easy, that the ability to have different views is fine. I think we have a problem with patriarchy, to come back to women. I think it's the patriarchy that I've observed in my research that causes more problems than most. It's the men in communities that refused to reaccommodate child soldiers when they came back. It wasn't the mothers. The mothers wanted them home and the men wouldn't accept them. Final comment is quite an interesting one about how to get the peace when there's no resolution of difference, because that's what we're after, I think, a peacefulness that doesn't rely on resolution. And I'm always taken back to the fictional writer H.G. Wells, The War of the Worlds. Those of you as old as I will remember that from your English literature. Those of you not will remember the movie. You know, H.G. Wells was writing in 1908. It's a long time ago, writing about a world which was tearing itself apart until the Martians came from outer space. And this huge existential threat came. And we managed to get on very quickly, very well with each other. There's a lesson or two there, I think. Particularly when you think of climate. If only we grow up and think and recognize that climate is an existential threat to humankind. Once we get to that place, then the little differences we have in our local communities will disappear, I hope.
Yes. I've got a couple of comments. First of all, we're talking about returnees, and they are not homogeneous group. There will be those who are still very dangerous, and rule of law needs to apply. There will be those who are sick and disturbed, and they need help. And then there are those who are maybe now disillusioned, who will be helping us, policymakers, researchers, and others to drive change and to influence their peers. The second comment is around the ideology and what we talked about, disagreeing without killing each other. At the core of the Irish peace process was not to persuade Sinn Féin and IRA to give up their will and their ambition for United Ireland. It was to develop conditions where they could pursue those goals in a peaceful, democratic manner. So it was to also, build the understanding within the unionist community that the Republicans may have a valid point, but this point needs to be made in a peaceful way rather than through violence and terrorism.
Amin, do you have a comment, or we do another? Just a quick comment on women. I actually studied extensively that, and I wrote a paper called The Female Face of Jihadism. And I agree with you, this is a real problem. Women have been, participating in political violence for ages. But what Europe didn't see coming is that their role was going to evolve. And in 2014, when Daesh, after the advent of Daesh, I was one of the first saying, be careful, they are not just going to be, mothers and bearers of today's cubs, tomorrow's lion, because that was the hashtag on Twitter. They are going to be facilitators, recruiters, and they are going on the ground. And this is what happened. When the Islamic State started to lose ground in Misrata in Libya, they deployed female snipers. They did the same in Mosul. And those who are coming back, as Eva said, it's not a monolithic group. Some might be totally disillusioned by IS and the ideology, but there is a journalist, David Thompson, who wrote a book on that, and he did interviews with them. Many of them are actually looking for new fronts. They want back to France, and they want to go back to Yemen, Libya, or anywhere else. And we need to think about that. And actually, a few months ago, also, 3 French women tried to perpetrate an attack in Saint-Michel, Notre-Dame. Fortunately, the attack was foiled, but this is a real issue that we need to think about. تفضلوا.
My name is Dr. Ali Al-Savalhi. I am a researcher at the University of Jordan. Actually, I spent around 12 years in Germany. I mean, I'm a marine material scientist, but now really I am focused completely on these issues because I find them priority, especially when I came back from Germany to Jordan. Actually, I mean, after long thinking and reading, I really ended with something that I hope that all accept it. It's about teaching religion and history in schools. Okay, so I have comments I have written, I made a lot of study. Actually, teaching religion in school, they teach them the history of Prophet Muhammad. Please don't be angry of me, okay? So I want to talk, okay? So they teach the history of Prophet Muhammad as a part of religion course in school. But this is history and not religion. So if Prophet Muhammad had problems with Jewish in that time, this is not a part of religion. This is history. This doesn't mean that it should be replaced every time. Okay? So we should move this part, okay, to the history book. This is number 1. Number 2, actually, there are some false sayings narrated from Prophet, which are completely false. For example, أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يقولوا لا إله إلا الله. I was asked to fight people unless they say shahada or they believe in God. And this is a false, because this contradicts the Quran. Okay? So this is a factor. Another factor of teaching history. We are teaching our children that there are 1 million people killed in Algeria by French. Look, history has a lot of brilliant stories. We should not come to this point, especially in this moment. So, for example, French has killed this amount of people. You know, this because we Arabs have the culture of revenge, you know. So yeah, believe me. So this is what I really ended up. I mean, from my small study, I did it by myself. So this is really very important. The other factor I would like to highlight is at home, we have violence at home. Believe me, when we communicate with our children using violence, a child grow up and sees nothing else than violence in life. So the only way to express about himself is violence. So unfortunately, in school, there should be a course beside Arabic and math and something called dialogue. How to discuss and how to see the other, okay? This is actually about, I mean, here in Arabic countries. About in Germany, sorry for making it long, but I have a friend, he asked me to help him with his daughter who has seen her looking to some Islamic websites, okay, to convince her and so on, okay? Actually, about those terrorists who grow up in Germany, I mean, especially in Germany, I don't know about other countries, because somehow they are isolated from the community due to discrimination. I mean, okay, in the laws there is no discrimination, but maybe in the streets they feel discriminated, for example, and sometimes parents isolate them from the community to keep their culture and so on, okay? So these are actually, I mean, one of the reasons, I mean, about youth in Europe. Finally, sorry for making it long, and also, but about the media, I just wonder how all these YouTube videos and tweets and Facebooks can anyone read it without being banned? Okay? I mean, who is responsible for making this and how ISIS could connect to the internet without being tracked? This is a big question we should think about. How ISIS could publish their things without being tracked. You know, now there's IP address, there's MAC address, there are physical address, there are many ways how to locate anyone. So how these are successfully distributed without being tracked and without being, I mean, monitored and so on. Sorry for making it long. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the panel for a very insightful discussion so far. My name is Barak Mahadin. I'm a researcher at the One Institute, part of the CVA team. And I'll keep my question very short and precise. And it will pick up on your last point on social media. So it's a question for Dr. Amin. You mentioned the use of social media, and we are, I think, in agreement that ISIS and other groups have been using social media. It's a very effective tool, and they use it for recruitment. They promote their narrative. So just to build up on what you've mentioned, I think little has been done to understand how we can build a counter narrative or an alternative narrative. We agree that it is powerful, it's there, but I don't think we've done enough or we've understood enough how we can build that counter narrative and have it be effective at countering the extremist narrative. So that question is to you, and maybe the rest of the panel can comment on that as well. What are the bases, for example, for building an effective counter narrative? Thank you very much.
Zaid, and I'm from Jordan. I'd like to ask Dr. Naveen, how much do you think the Jordanian government is aware about the issue of the jihadists returning back to Jordan? As far as I know, our borders are closed, so how are those people managing to come back? And what is the government doing to address these issues? And how can WANA assist the Jordanian government in being aware about this issue and help implement programs that can reintegrate them in a safe way? Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Saif Maaz. I'm a Jordanian too. You have been talking about radicalism and terrorists and these things, and I wish that somebody could talk about the core issue. And the young gentleman over here, he talked about the double standards that it has been. Now we can see from the politicians, like President Trump talking during his campaign about the creation of ISIS and he accused Hillary Clinton on that one. And also we saw in this region, you know, that when the United States and the UK, they decided to invade Iraq, saying that they will bring democracy over there. And they created that there is a weapon of mass destruction, and then we learned as a people over here that there was no weapon of mass destruction, but Iraq was destroyed, and there is no democracy. President Trump, again, during his campaign, he said that when he was asked about the oil in Iraq, and he said, you know, they asked him, how you talk about a sovereign country? He started, you know, making jokes, said, what sovereign you are talking about? The same thing happened in Libya. The NATO destroyed a dictator, which is okay, but they left it destroyed. They didn't do anything after that. Recently, the ex-prime minister of Qatar, talking to the BBC, he stated that they were asked to pump money, about $143 billion on the Syrian issue. So this amount of money, if it was distributed on the well-being of people in this area, in the Middle East or other countries, I think the results would be much, much more better than that. Now, nobody is talking about these issues. We are discovering recently that there are countries who provide weapons and money for those who you call radicals and terrorists. Can they work alone? If they don't get the money and the weapon, can they do what they did till now? So this is, I think, was the core issue, and I wish, you know, we could hear from somebody, you know, what's the truth about all this.
Thank you. Well, I leave the panelists to pick up the question and answer it. And I will ask you also, guys, please, if you had one takeaway idea to give to the audience, what it will be.
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for raising so many important issues. Sir, regarding your question, I will refer to Mr. in dealing with the intelligence part of the story, because, and I don't want to deal with the conspiracy theory here and the role of governments in bringing those things. I would like to get back to the essential point, is that answering your question, I would like to tell a short story. In 2004, I was traveling to Boston via Alitalia to Rome. At the same plane, actually, there was a small group of young people between 16 and 21 traveling as well. But surprisingly, they were speaking 3 languages, Arabic, English, and Hebrew. I had that curiosity, especially that I'm Lebanese and I lived the war in Lebanon for 17 years, and I was always thinking how to bring peace to my country. So I asked one of the young ladies, what's happening in the back seats of the plane? She said that we're young people from all over the regions. There is a French institution which is taking all of those guys to Harvard to live for 1 month to discuss how they can live together. And this is, I guess, the crucial point. Are we able to live together? If yes, how? What are the measures to be taken from each and every one of us to accept the other counterpart? To actually to have some concessions about, yes, we need to live together to bring peace. And this is, I assume this is our role in this conference, to bring these questions to the tables. This brought me back to Lebanon and to think over and over through academic people, media people, researchers, about, yes, how can we promote peace? There are some crucial points that we have hands on, you know, we can control. Others we can't. But I assume that from where do we stand, let's do our job in full. To raise this issue, yes, we need to bring peace, to bring tolerance to societies, to accept each other regarding of the differences, religious differences, social differences, whatever, and especially to work on reconciliation. I have a colleague of mine from Ireland actually working on the Irish problem, I'm here to represent two institutions, actually. One is the Lebanese Development Network, and the other one is Lebanon Dialogue Initiative. The new one, and I beg your pardon just to mention this, we're soliciting over the UN to recognize Lebanon as an international land for dialogue, and increasingly to build a center for international dialogue. If we are into conflict, where to go to speak about our problems, to draft some solutions. So I guess that the nature of the battles now is changing. We're not into any more in traditional wars. We have the war of internet, we have the battle of thoughts, of radicalism, of extremism. And I guess our role as social activists to bring as much as we can of rational solutions and to promote it through youth. We believe in, I myself believe in education, which requires awareness, and I think it's a long-term process, yeah, I know. But still, we can affect those small groups in bringing them to new leadership. We need a new leadership. We need to breach this vicious circle in having the quote saying that history only repeats itself through bad things. Thank you.
Philosopher Walter Benjamin talks about only two types of stories, sailor stories and peasant stories. So sailor stories are those of unheard lands and bizarre things and adventurous things, maybe stories which create for young people the sense of adventures. And then the peasant stories, which are stories of the ordinary, is something what is close to us, and sometimes we don't fully appreciate the profound wisdom which exists in those stories. So I think that our role of each one of you in this room is to merge those two stories and create one coherent message of hope and a shared sense of humanity.
So just a big compliment to the quality of comments and questions. They're always challenging, and there's a huge amount I'd like to discuss. But on the issue of responsibility and the big issues, you know, I'm British. My government supported the Americans in creating the mess that we're trying to sort out now. Let's be very clear about that. And my thesis generally, as I said earlier, is I don't think our governments are fit for purpose. They don't represent their people. They're captured by short-term politicians with ambitions for national progress. I was telling Dalia earlier, you know, there was a terrible mass shooting in Las Vegas, which had nothing to do with Muslims not so long ago, right? Somebody stood in a hotel room and sprayed bullets onto ordinary people for no other reason that they were clearly troubled. And in Britain, in London, we were outraged about this. This is gun law. This is ridiculous, United States. Let me tell you that 80% of the munitions were supplied by Britain as part of international exports. The Saudis are using British munitions to kill Yemenis now. So there is an insanity in the world, but I think we know that, and we have to bring it back. On your issue of the internet, and we should be able to trace the source of where jihadists and others are mobilizing, we can't. The technology has moved on. This science forum will tell you. The mobile internet is moving at such a pace, you can never pin someone down. We have to just accept the counter-narrative, which I think is a very powerful point, is really the only solution. How can we mobilize, not with governments, how can we mobilize at the grassroots a counter-narrative that will combine the passion of mothers worried about their kids and will combine the passion of communities that say it's enough to struggle just getting on without killing each other for ridiculous missions. So my takeaway, I think I am a believer that intercultural dialogue is a must on our curriculum. We must learn to talk and discuss difference without needing to resolve it, without needing to reach a destination in which is a nice place, because we won't. There is no destination in dialogue. It's a process, just as radicalization is. And so my takeaway is keep governments out of the kitchen, and let's get ordinary people to commit themselves to using the tools we have to talk to each other.
Thank you. Yep, I will quickly answer your question on the government. Now, the government knows and monitors everyone who have returned. In the past, anyone who wanted to return had to have some kind of communication through his family with the security forces to be able to come back in the first place. They're heavily monitored. Now there are changes in the government policy. Anyone who returned, we know that there is a rehabilitation program in prisons. Nothing is known about its curricula, its duration, how it's managed, etc. The government keeps this very secret. What we can do, WANA is a policy think tank, so we do research to guide and inform policymakers, and this is a good chance to thank actually the CVE team here, Thea, Nadine, and Barak. They work really hard, and we work on a number of topics on CVE. We organize regular meetings with government representatives, and we invite them whenever we are sharing a study for them to take that input, but we don't have a mandate to force them to apply it. That is up to them to apply it. We try to open their eyes how they can use this information, these findings, to improve their work. And all our publications have policy recommendations for the government and donors also. Linking on that, government and donors, my takeaway would be that CVE can no longer be conceptualized as short-term, isolated programs. CVE has to be embedded within development long-term goals. Radicalization is one response to the frustrations we have here, the same as drugs and criminal behavior. So this is now the time where governments and all stakeholders recognize that it needs to be embedded there. This is not my idea, this is the team's idea, so I have to acknowledge this is a result of brainstorming together on all results. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for this amazing panel. There was so much great matter in here and so much food for thought. It's been an honor to share it. Again, thank you. Shukran jazilan. Merci beaucoup. And I hope you will take these takeaway ideas and spread them. And hopefully we'll have something out of it. Thank you very much. Bye.